Welcome to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Always a pleasure to be with you. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you're having a great week so far, entering Friday, another really fun college football weekend coming up. But you know what? Yeah, it's college football season. Yes, the Braves baseball season is over with, but we do not stop talking Braves baseball here at Hammer Territory 24/7, 365 days out of the year. Not necessarily talking about it every day, but you'll always have content to enjoy as part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. And it's always a pleasure to hear the excellent perspective of my podcast partner, Stephen Tolbert. Stephen, it's been a while, but good talking with you again, sir. Hope you've been well.
Hey, what's up, Shawn? Yeah, man, it's been a minute since you and I have done one of these. I know you've had a bunch of stuff going on. That's the beauty of having a four-man podcast is, all of us have stuff going on at some point, and there's always other people here to still put out content even when the season's over and even if we got stuff going on. So yeah, man, it's good to be on, and it's an interesting show tonight. We got some interesting things to talk about.
Absolutely. Going to talk about a few things that I know have already been discussed, but I think that it's fun, to look at different perspectives and then also talk about what I think is going to be an underrated subject matter, an underrated but very significant area of focus for the Braves this offseason. But Stephen, I wanted to talk with you for a second about something that we discussed, and I know that Scott and Brad talked about it as well. But of course, the biggest storyline so far for the Braves this offseason was the firing of both their hitting coaches, including Kevin Seitzer, as well as catching coach Sal Fasano. Now, the dismissal of Sal Fasano, I think that he was a very well-respected, well-thought-of part of the Braves organization. Understand, though, that, the Braves probably felt that, moves had to be made. And I don't necessarily know if I was that vocal about it. But up until the very end of the season, I was not on board with the potential dismissal of Kevin Seitzer. But eventually I just got to the point to where I always found it that Kevin Seitzer's ability to be able to extract value from players on the margins, those players who had performed well in the past, but before they came to the Braves in the present, they struggled. But then when they came to Atlanta, they did so well. Ramon Laureano and Whit Merrifield this year, for instance, the 2021 season, we saw it on multiple occasions. That was a great contribution, I think, that Kevin Seitzer for years added to this lineup. But that was to supplement our core, to supplement our main players. But at the end of the day, as awesome of I guess you could say, skill that was of Kevin Seitzer, the value added there does not overcome the questions getting louder and the frustrations that came from the Braves offense, number one, struggling when it needed to perform the most in postseason play, and also the bigger and bigger sample size that we were seeing, that if the Braves are not hitting home runs at historic levels, there were plenty of flaws in the lineup. So, yes, I was not that big of a fan of the idea of Kevin Seitzer moving on for most of the season. I think at the end of the day, it's the right move. And just at the end of the day, Stephen, this team needs a new voice to come in and say the things that we need to be said, which is that the Braves need to find a way to improve their approach at the plate so that they have multiple ways offensively to win games.
Yeah. I mean, this was a significant move. Like, this is not something that the Braves have done in a long time since Anthopoulos has been there. I mean, their coaching staff has been rock solid, and the only time they ever replace anybody is if they go out and get better jobs elsewhere, like they did with Eric Young senior and Ron Washington this last offseason. But the idea of firing three coaches off of this staff, and this was a firing. Let's not get it mixed up. I know a lot of times teams use, creative language to avoid using that word, but this was a firing. They had another year left on their contract. They wanted to come back. They were probably expecting to come back after the postseason press conference that Alex and Snit gave. And they were let go. And so they were fired. And, I do think it's a little bit of vindication for us who have spent all year saying it's not just the injuries. There's something wrong with the approach of this team that needs to be better. If I know you and I have talked about it a bunch during the season, but if you're somebody out there that has shared that opinion along with us, then you do feel a bit vindicated by the team agreeing with you, essentially saying, yeah, I know we had injuries, but even with the injuries, that offensive performance in 2024 was just not up to par. Like that was miserably bad. And it had to be. I mean, Seitzer was one of the most respected hitting coaches in baseball and has been for a long time coming into this season. And to dream up a scenario where he would get fired at the end of the 2024 season would have been pretty far fetched, back in spring training. But that's what happened. And, you know, I probably could have made an argument for keeping him. I probably could have made an argument for getting rid of him. That probably means it was, a 50-50 proposition in my mind. I don't really have a strong opinion either way on the fact that they did it. It was very weird how they did it, where they came out very, very strongly for keeping all of those guys and then 6 days later firing three of them. You don't typically see that. I mean, Alex Anthopoulos will lie through his teeth about the roster, but you don't typically see GMs and presidents of baseball ops lie about, coaches' jobs. Like not that directly where, the question was asked, are they coming back? And Snit and Alex both gave very clear, yep, they're coming back. Like there wasn't a lot of ambiguity in those answers. And then not even a week later, they fired three of them. So yeah, it was a pretty big 180 from the team in a very short amount of time. But ultimately, I don't necessarily disagree with it. I do think this team, like you and I have said, a lot of the year, even when you account for the injuries, there was something wrong with this team offensively and the approach, the preparation, something needed to change going into 2025. And obviously now, it will. They fired both of their hitting coaches and are on the look for new ones.
And here's the other aspect of this that I think is interesting to talk about, and I think that's worth certainly bringing up. The thought is that okay with the firing of Kevin Seitzer, especially, is it just the Braves kind of, moving around deck chairs? And yeah, they're going to bring in two new hitting coaches, but is the same overall, organizational philosophy towards, slug at all costs going to be there? And the reason that I say that is because last year, that's the thing that I think may not be talked about enough. It's just how amazing that it is that a year ago, we were coming off this team having arguably one of the 5 best offensive regular seasons that a lineup had ever had. Like, that's how good. This team tied the all-time team record for home runs. That's how spectacular this offense is. And a year later, we're talking about the hitting coach being fired. When you think about it from that perspective, it's pretty eye-opening. But a year ago also, Stephen, what stood out to me is that I don't think there was hardly anyone who believed more in what the Braves did in 2023 being sustainable than Alex Anthopoulos in terms of how he responded after another early exit from those 2023 playoffs. But with that being said, how eye-opening it is with the fact that Seitzer was fired just a year removed from a historic offensive regular season for this Braves team, that's why I'm a bit encouraged that this isn't a situation where the Braves are just going to come bring guys in, yet the organizational philosophy is going to stay the same. I think that Alex Anthopoulos, even despite the fact that we had that historic season in 2023, he moved away from a coach that had been here for 9 years? Just under a decade? He moved away from one of the biggest reasons why offense had been the calling card of this Braves era so far. He moved away from that because I think that Alex Anthopoulos realizes, listen, whatever you need to have going in the playoffs for this Braves team to be successful, it's not there right now. So something needs to change. So I think that Alex Anthopoulos probably has shifted his perspective a bit. I think he certainly still believes in this offense, that he believes it's a championship-worthy offense, and I believe that as well. But I think that he knows it's got to have depth to it. It's got to have multiple ways to be able to win. And I think that he realizes that means that there's got to be another voice or two to come in and help that out. So the point that I'm getting at is for anybody who thinks that, oh, well, this is just them making a move to make a move because they felt they had to. No, I feel there's a good chance that some things are going to change, and that could be a great development for this core because this core is still young enough, still talented enough to be able to make the changes that it needs and be highly successful as a championship core. They just need to find the right voice to bring in. But overall, I think this can signal that the needed offensive changes, the needed offensive approaches this lineup needs, I think we can see it if they find the right person.
Yeah, I mean, talk about walking into a dream scenario, right? I mean, whoever they hire as a hitting coach, and you've got as much talent as any hitting coach has ever walked into, maybe ever. You got a lineup full of guys that had, massive underperformances relative to their batted ball data that's, should just naturally, regress to the positive. Um, the guy's going to come in, whoever it is they hired, and, he has a very good chance of looking like a genius without having to do much. So it's going to be a nice, I'm sure the Braves are going to have ample number of prospects to look at in terms of hitting coaches that are interested in the job. I think there's going to be quite a few candidates. I know a lot of people will be interested in the job. It's tough to really know anything about a hitting coach, relative to what they're going to teach. They don't really get into that stuff publicly, so you're really going to have to just wait until the 2025 offense shows up and see how it looks and if it looks any different before you can really make any judgments. And even then, you got to wait a little bit. So yeah, it is a fascinating situation. It was fascinating the way they did a complete 180, not even 7 days later. And again, I do think there's some vindication for us that have said all year something's up, something's wrong, something needs to be better, something needs to change. Yeah, the injuries are definitely part of it, but there's something going on with this offense that isn't right. And the team obviously agreed, and so we're gonna get a whole new hitting staff in 2025.
So, Stephen, flipping the page from what didn't work a lot of the time in 2024 to the part of the team that did work far better than I think anybody anticipated. And that, of course, is the starting rotation for the Atlanta Braves. The starting rotation for the Atlanta Braves that led the majors in FWAR as a starting unit, in ERA as a starting unit, in FIP as a starting unit, and in XFIP, XFIP, whatever you want to call it, as a starting unit. It's very rare where you see the same starting unit lead in all four of those categories. And that just goes to show how awesome this starting staff was. But then you get into the injuries that this starting staff dealt with. Losing Spencer Strider after 2 starts, Ronaldo Lopez and Max Fried losing 3 to 5 starts in the second half of the season. And we still got excellent results. Now, of course, the reason why was Chris Sale having one of the best seasons we've seen really in the past half century or more from a pitcher his age. This, a Cy Young pitcher who won the NL Triple Crown. That definitely helps out. But the reason that I bring this up, Stephen, is because 2025, or 2024 was a year defined by the Braves pitching. And even though you're losing Max Fried, even though you're probably going to lose Max Fried, probably going to lose Charlie Morton, you have to feel pretty good about Sale, Ronaldo Lopez, and Spencer Schwellenbach as being 3/5 of your rotation with Spencer Strider coming back for 2025.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely in a better spot. Last year, before we knew about Chris Sale, before we knew about Ronaldo Lopez, and before we knew about Spencer Schwellenbach, all three of those guys were kind of major developments in 2024 that we didn't really know about before the season happened, or at least how good they could be. Before those three guys, looking ahead, the 2025 rotation looked pretty scary, and not in a good way. Like it looked like Spencer Strider and then a bunch of question marks because, like you said, almost certainly losing Max this offseason. Charlie Morton gave every indication possible this season that this season would be his last. Now, it might not be. He might come back, but I think the smart money right now is on him not coming back. And so before we knew about Sale, Schwellenbach, and Ronaldo Lopez, it was like, who in the world is going to pitch for this team in 2025 and beyond? And obviously, in 2024, we got, massive upgrades in some unknown spots. Spencer Schwellenbach came out of nowhere to be awesome. If it wasn't for some unbelievable rookie campaigns in the National League this year, he would have been a lock for Rookie of the Year. But he's, I don't even know if he's going to get top 3 with some of the incredible rookie seasons that were, put forth in 2024. Ronaldo Lopez was a converted reliever. No one knew how good he would actually be as a starter again, if it was going to be kind of a short-lived experiment, or if it was going to be something that actually, held and went throughout the whole season. And he was 10 times better than I thought he could be as a full-time starter. And then even after the Chris Sale trade, there was a lot of concern about his health, about could he stay healthy? Could he actually produce for this team over multiple years? They immediately gave him a new contract where he basically got 2 guaranteed years, 2024 and 2025, and nobody knew what to expect. And all he did was go out and probably win the Cy Young in 2024. So the rotation picture, while still pretty murky for 2025, certainly looks better now than it did at this time last year. Because at this time last year, we knew we would probably lose Max. We knew we'd probably lose Morton, but we didn't know about Sale. We didn't know about Lopez, and we didn't know about Schwellenbach. So we're going to talk about it a little bit more here in a minute, but the picture is certainly better than it was 12 months ago.
The picture is definitely better than it was 12 months ago for 2025 and beyond. There's no doubt about that. Even with Max Fried probably going in free agency, the chance that Charlie Morton is to retire, yes, it is much better now than it was 12 months ago. But here's the thing that I will say to that, throwing a bit of cold water on this discussion. I feel that the offense is going to have an easier chance of returning to an elite status in 2025 for the Braves than I feel the pitching staff is going to be able to repeat being at the top or near the top of the majors in pitching in 2025. That is a statement that I feel comfortable making right now, because it was spectacular to see what Sale and Schwellenbach and Ronaldo Lopez did. It was awesome. In each and every one of the cases of those pitchers, they did far better than expected. But being able to repeat those performances, it becomes very hard to do when you start to break down factors that need to be in place again for them to be able to repeat those performances. For one, in the case of all 3 pitchers, they each threw more innings in 2024 than they ever had before in the case of Spencer Schwellenbach, or than they had in many years in the case of Ronaldo Lopez and Chris Sale. Chris Sale and Ronaldo Lopez both dealt with injuries at some pretty inopportune times. So could they potentially be able to handle heavy workloads again in 2025? What about the potential for regression? Because Chris Sale, I think, is going to be an ace. I don't know if he'll have another season like he did again in 2024, but in the case of Sale, Schwellenbach, and Ronaldo Lopez, this was the first time the National League really got to see them as a whole. Seeing them again, will each of these pitchers have the same success? It's hard to say. And the other thing about it is that you throw all those things into the mix. Chris Sale's age, again, Spencer Schwellenbach being able to do it a second time, third time through the National League and baseball in general. But I don't think what's talked about enough is everybody's talking about Ronald Acuna Jr. What's he going to look like when he comes back? Well, what's Spencer Strider going to look like when he comes back? It's very rare that you see in a pitcher's first year back from Tommy John surgery, if they were a star pitcher before, that they immediately return to being a star pitcher the year after they come back from Tommy John surgery. So yes, the Braves, the franchise, the fan base should feel very, very strongly about the starting rotation, much better than they did 12 months ago. But I also think that there are a ton of legitimate questions that are worth asking that could stand in the way of this pitching staff. I think they'll be very good, but them being truly elite and the best in baseball, a lot of factors are going to have to go in their favor again, and I don't think it's as much of a guarantee as some may feel.
No, yeah, it's a fair. I mean, it's a fair point. I actually made this point on the show that Brad and Scott and I did a couple of nights ago about the DH. That I think the starting pitching staff could sneakily come up to be the biggest question of the all season because I mean, let's just say hypothetically, because this is very realistic. Let's just say Max Fried and Charlie Morton are both gone. Let's say Max signs somewhere else, and let's say Charlie retires. We don't know that for a fact yet. We'll have to see how it plays out, but both of those are very realistic possibilities. So let's just put those two guys aside. Like you said, Spencer Strider's coming back from Tommy John surgery. You have no idea what you're going to get. You don't know when he's going to come back. You don't know when he's actually going to enter the rotation, and you don't know what you're going to get from him once he does. Right. So that's a big question. Chris Sale has threw more innings in 2024 than he's thrown in a long, 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 long time. And what is the cumulative effect of that going into 2025? Is he going to stay as healthy as he did this year? That was kind of a unicorn for him to stay healthy pretty much all season, right up until the very last 2 weeks. That doesn't happen for him a lot. And is it going to happen again in 2025? I don't know. Smart money is probably not. It's not going to, odds of him having a fully healthy Cy Young level season again are probably pretty low, if I'm being honest. Even if he's good, I don't know if he's going to be that good. Ronaldo Lopez, again, same thing, threw more innings last year than he's thrown in a long, long time. What's the cumulative effect of that going to be? He had a FIP about a run higher than his ERA. So he also dealt with some pretty good batted ball luck. That's probably going to regress. Does this many innings on his arm, does it have a negative effect in 2025? That's a big question. And then you got the rookie, Spencer Swellenbach. Ironically, I think his performance might be the most repeatable because there wasn't any big underperformance or overperformance relative to expected numbers. He's still very young. Now, he did throw more innings last year than he's thrown ever before. But again, he's a very, very young pitcher. So it might not be as big a deal for a young guy like him, but that is a question, right? That many innings, does it have an effect on you next year? So you add it all up, and even though the names, if you just read out the names, Spencer Strider, Chris Sale, Ronaldo Lopez, Spencer Swallenbach, yeah, that's a really good four to go to camp with. All of them have big questions, and it leads me to believe that the Braves are probably going to have to be somewhat aggressive on the pitching market this offseason. When Alex talked about it in his postseason presser, he kind of waved it off and said, starting pitching is not going to be a huge priority. I don't believe that for a second. You shouldn't believe that for a second either. That's one of those classic Alex Anthopoulos answers that is almost certainly not true, not even remotely true. I do think they're going to have to go get some help. I think they're going to need to get, a veteran, somebody that can eat some innings. If you are dealing with a Strider injury, if you are dealing with a Chris Sale injury, if you're dealing with a Ronaldo injury, if Schwallenbach backs up a little bit as a second year player after the league has seen him, you need somebody else, I think, and maybe two more guys, quite honestly, because again, you don't know when Spencer Strider is ever going to come back. Like, you don't know. I mean, you don't want to think about this, but it's a world where he has a setback and he's not back till June, July. I mean, you just don't know when it's this far out. And you got to have some insurance there, and you can never have too much pitching. Yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see. I do think there's a chance the Braves could be pretty aggressive in the starting pitching market, either trade or signing this offseason, because you look at each of their four guys and the names look good, but there are some pretty big question marks behind those four names. And I think there's certainly an argument for being aggressive and adding a couple more arms to the rotation.
So this is a segue to, you and Brad and Scott again had a fantastic conversation about the DH. You may want to call it a conundrum scenario. It's going to definitely be a very, very interesting situation to play out when we're talking about Jorge Soler and Marcelo Zuna and Ronald Acuna Jr. I actually feel that there is some sense about keeping all three going into next season, especially with, again, the strengths of Jorge Soler as an offensive player really match up well with some of the weaknesses of this Braves lineup that we've seen over the past couple of years. But at the end of the day, I think that it's clear that when you're talking about, hey, probably can't go into next season with all three of these players likely being at a DH status to start the year, probably doesn't make too much sense. And of the three, Jorge Soler is the most sensible to trade. I bring up, though, his potential to be traded because I feel that that may be the most sensible avenue for the Braves to go get a veteran starter with some reliability and upside at a pretty reasonable cost. And the reason that I say that is what we've seen in the playoffs. Y'all talked extensively about what potential market Jorge Soler would have. And I don't think that Jorge Soler, obviously, look at the cost that the Braves acquired him at, even though they took on all his money. He's not going to get a big return, right? But I do think you look at the AL Central, you look at the three teams that made the playoffs. The Indians are still in it. The Tigers were in it. The Royals were in it. Every one of those offenses were far from being the typical level of offense that you would expect to see on a playoff team. In other words, you put Jorge Soler in any of those three offenses, he automatically is a top three hitter in any of those three offenses, in my opinion. You put Jorge Soler in one of the NL Central lineups that want to compete next year, the Cubs or the Reds, to compete with the Brewers, he's a top three hitter, and I think in any one of those lineups. I feel there's a market out there for Jorge Soler, especially in the two Central divisions, for teams that want to go after the playoffs. And so with that being the case, 2 years, $26 million that he's owed, what the Braves could do is use him in a trade. Two-team deal, three-team deal, and potentially bring back a veteran starter that they're intrigued by. But then, Steven, we're just coming off a year where the Braves got far more value out of Chris Sale than anybody anticipated. They got far more value out of Ronaldo Lopez than anybody anticipated. If you could use Jorge Soler to go get a pitcher who may not necessarily be living up to expectations elsewhere, but you bring him into the fold in Atlanta and he could be a reliable veteran starter, that could be the most valuable way for the Braves to utilize Jorge Soler this season and make this rotation even stronger moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely an argument for it, right? It's kind of a two birds, one stone thing. You're solving your DH problem while also bringing in a starter. I do think Soler is the most logical to be traded. If you missed the show a couple nights ago with me, Brad Scott, I first suggest you go listen to it. It was a really fun show, and we did a deep, like 50-minute conversation on this one topic. And you know, I do think Soler makes the most sense to be traded. We talked about with Marcel about, Scott brought up a great point about him potentially having 10-5 rights. And by the way, on that, we actually did a little bit more research after that. And it looks like he does have 10-5 rights from everything I was able to find. There was some question about whether his time on the restricted list in 21, caused him to miss out on 5 full years of service time with the Braves. But the way service time is calculated, I'm not going to get into the whole thing right now, but the way service time is calculated, it looks like even with that suspension, he would still have enough service time to qualify. So I do think he has 10-5 rights, and of course that only matters if they want to trade him. And I don't really think they do. I think Soler is the guy that makes more sense, and that's kind of the conclusion that we reached the other night. And yeah, listen, if there's a team like the Royals, the Braves originally traded for Soler from the Royals, if you remember in 21, who needs more offense, who's got some decent pitching. There's a bunch of teams like that. Offense was down so much, and this was the point I made a couple of nights ago, is offense was down so much in 24. There's going to be a lot of teams looking for power. There's going to be a lot of teams looking for offense. And, Soler's at 13 million for the next 2 years, which is pretty reasonable. 26 million over 2 years. That's very reasonable. Yeah. I mean, if there's a pitcher that, the other team needs to maybe clear some money to get him to make Soler fit, and the Braves are interested in that guy and think they can maybe extract a little more value out of, I could absolutely see it. I mean, that's on the face of it, just on the logic of it, that makes sense. Now, of course, you got to match up name for name, team for team. the devil's in the details on those things. But yeah, just on the face of it, that makes sense to me. Solair is the most likely to be traded. I do think the Braves are going to be in the pitching market. It's a bit like the Von Grissom situation last year where we kind of all knew he was going to get traded at some point and the Braves needed a pitcher. So, people kind of connected the dots. Like, what if they traded him for a pitcher? And that's exactly what ended up happening, obviously, in the Chris Sale deal. So that does make sense. I would not be surprised at all if it happens. And if it does happen, then, we can give Shawn a big pat on the back for being the first one to speak it into existence. Because yeah, on its face, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and again, like I say, I've been a strong advocate for years of Alex Anthopoulos being a master on the margins, going to find these offensive players. The best example is Jorge Soler going to find these players who have struggled elsewhere in the present of their careers. They come to Atlanta, they do so well. Laureano and Mirafield, the latest example is that they were huge for us in the second half of last year. But I do think also that we're seeing that the Braves can do the same type of stuff with the pitching. And if they just don't have room for Solaire, we'll go get you some more reliable pitching staff. Not only can you never have enough pitching, you certainly can never have enough reliable pitching. And if Jorge Soler could be the ticket for the Braves to potentially find another option to be just that for him, I think it would definitely be worth the move. But I know that we love to talk about the Braves, Stephen, but I think it's also fun to be able to talk about, just baseball in general, because I know both you and I are fans of the sport just because we love the game. It's awesome to see. We've got the NLCS and ALCS going on right now. As of right now, the Indians in an awesome game. David Fry, the 2-run home run to beat the Yankees 7-5. I know the Indians are now down, or excuse me, the Guardians. I keep saying Indians. The Guardians are now down 2-1 to the Yankees, and I think that the Dodgers were moving on up against the Mets. They're probably about to make it a 3-1 over the Mets. But the thing that I'll say to this is, Stephen, is that how do you want to see this play out? The number one thing I wanted to see this postseason when the Braves were eliminated was the Phillies be eliminated. That happened. How do you want to see this playoffs play out with the 4 remaining teams?
Yeah, I guess I have a different opinion than most. Brad and Scott threw out this prompt on a show they did last week, and everybody answered, and pretty much everybody answered. Guardians won, Guardians won, Guardians won. Everybody wants the Guardians to win. And I understand that it's, what happens this time of year is basically we look at payroll and we kind of rank the teams from smallest payroll to biggest payroll. And whoever has the smallest payroll, it kind of becomes the people's champ, right? That's kind of the team everybody roots for, the underdog. And if you've got a small market team versus 3 Goliaths, then everybody roots for the Guardians. And so I understand that, but that's not really how I look at it or how I view it. Baseball is an uncapped sport. Um, the amount of money that these small market teams don't spend on players is entirely their choice. Every single team in baseball is owned by a billionaire. If they wanted to spend more money on players, they could. If they, there is a large contingent of owners in the sport that run their franchises like used car dealerships, quite honestly. And I don't I don't love rooting for those franchises, to be honest. I'm not saying the Guardians are one of those. I don't actually know a ton about the Guardians ownership. I've heard it's actually pretty good, but again, there is a bunch of these really small market teams that I don't love the way they run their franchises. The Marlins are in that group as well. Pirates, Reds, Twins, just again, like it's almost like it's a pawn shop. And on the other side, you have these owners that spend a ton of money and they don't care about anything else except winning. They're all in committed to winning baseball games. The Dodgers, the Yankees, the Braves are in that category now, the way they spend, the Mets. And I know this time of year we villainize those teams and we, turn the small market guys into our underdog stories. But I view it the other way. I root for the owners and the teams that are all in committed to winning. And I have a hard time rooting for teams that don't really put, kind of put the bare minimum into their team and then just hope for the best. So yeah, I kind of want to see like a juggernaut World Series. I want to see kind of the Yankees and Dodgers. I mean, I think that would be fun. I wouldn't really care who won. The Mets, I'll lay in front of a lawnmower before I root for the Mets. So the Mets would definitely be 4. I'd put the Guardians 3, and then I want to see a Yankees Dodgers World Series. I think that would be fun. I'm kind of sick of the underdog stories the last few years, anyways. I think it's time for some big brands to get back in the World Series. Shohei versus Judge would be unbelievably fun. Yeah, I'm going against the grain. I know this is unpopular, but I'm going against the grain. I want to see. I think I want to see Yankees Dodgers.
For the past 15 years, and I'll give Chris Black, his ex Twitter handle is down to Black. He put a tweet out there earlier today that was pretty awesome to see. That the top 7 players in, I guess, B-War probably for the 2020s. The top 7 players: Shohei, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Jose Ramirez, Freddie Freeman, Francisco Lindor, Mookie Betts. All 7 are still active in this year's playoffs, which is awesome to see.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
I'm here for the underdog story. I'm here for it. That's fine. Sure. I'm not here for the Mets. Don't want any part of the Mets winning the World Series.
No, Mets need to lose every game.
I'm here for a Dodgers Yankees World Series.
Yeah, that a boy. That a boy. That's what I'm talking about.
The Having the big brands play each other, that's certainly the selling point. But the other thing to me, you brought it up, Judge versus Shohei. For the past 15 years, I think that probably the matchup that many of us wanted to see more than any other was Bryce Harper versus Mike Trout in a World Series. Mike Trout, unfortunately, has not made it. Good chance he may never make it. He unfortunately just has not had a big presence in the playoffs. Bryce Harper has one of the best playoff performers, I think, in baseball history. He did make it to a World Series, but hasn't won it. How awesome would it be for baseball in general, a sport that many of us who love it, when we talk about the fact that it does not do good enough getting the publicity that it should be getting? How awesome would it be to have in my opinion, the 2 unquestionably best talents in the game right now facing off for a World Series in the 2
100%.
biggest markets?
100%. I'm 100% with you.
Not only do you get them in the 2 biggest markets, do you get them on the biggest stage in the sport, but at least one of them adds a World Series title to their resume. It's awesome when your sport's best player or one of your sport's 2 best players wins a title. That's one of the best ways to promote your sport. And we have that opportunity. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of Shohei. I'm a fan of Aaron Judge. I'm a fan of them as people. And I would love for one of them to win a title. Why not them both face off for that opportunity?
Yeah, and listen, if you're an underdog guy, like if you're somebody that's like, I'm always rooting for the underdog, I want the underdog to win, I want the underdog to advance, then the last like 3 or 4 years, you've had all of that you can take. Like, the 6th seed in the National League has made the World Series like 3 or 4 years in a row. Like we've had that. Like, and if you look at the ratings for the World Series, like the last 7 or 8 years, the trends have not been good. Like one of the downsides of having all these kind of smaller market, less heralded teams in the World Series is they don't have a ton of like national pop. And the World Series ratings have really suffered because of it. And I would just love to see like a massive, like nationwide interest in the World Series. And I think the best way to do that would be Dodgers Yankees. And I know people are like, I'll never root for the Yankees. I'll never root for the Dodgers. I don't really care who wins the World Series, but I do want to see. I think we've had all these underdog stories the last few years. I think it's time for a big brand World Series, big ratings, national stories, get this some momentum going into 2025. Yeah, I understand why everybody kind of picks the smallest payroll team left and roots for them. I don't really follow that. I don't really agree with the logic they use, but I do understand it. But this year, let's go big brands. Let's go big names. Let's go biggest stars. Shohei versus Judge, Yankees, Dodgers, big ratings, tons of fun. Yeah, give me Yankees, Dodgers.
Absolutely. And listen, the Lane Thomas home runs, the David Fry home runs, the Kerry Carpenter home runs, those moments are awesome. They are absolutely incredible. So much fun. And if an Austin Wells for the Yankees wants to hit a home run in a big moment in the World Series, that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, hey, it's okay every now and then to have the 2 biggest markets and the 2 best players in the sport from those markets and in baseball in general facing each other. I think that's a good scenario. And again, hey, at the end of the day, it's neither the Mets or the Phillies. So that just adds incentive to it. Steven, do you have anything else as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
Nope. It's been, obviously off season is going to get going as soon as the World Series ends. Baseball's off season starts 5 days after the World Series is over. So, as soon as we get to the end of this thing, probably in the next 2 weeks, then we're going to get firing up and going for the off season, and we'll have content every week. We'll probably do 2 or 3 shows a week. Like Brad said, like Shawn said earlier in this podcast, this is a 12-month podcast. We don't go dark like a lot of other shows do for the off season. So make sure you're subscribed. Apple, Spotify, where we're transitioning to video pretty quickly, pretty heavily. The YouTube page has grown quite a bit, so we'll be transitioning to video. Make sure you're subscribed everywhere, and we appreciate the support as always.
And I'd like to apologize in advance for anybody who's going to be tuning in to see my smiling face. I do smile. I'm not going to say it's the best thing to see in the world, but I do smile a lot like Steven, so it'll be fun to do these with him when it comes to video. But for Steven Tolbert, you can find him at B_outliers on Twitter/X. My name's Shawn Coleman. You can find me at StatsSEC on Twitter/X. You can find Hammer Territory across all forms of social media, a proud part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts, an ever-growing family of podcasts with more and more team-specific podcasts across baseball by the day. Until next time, for Steven Tolbert, my name's Shawn Coleman. Go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.